Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, November 17th. We begin tonight with the Prime Minister's journey to Thailand for meetings with other world leaders. There, Justin Trudeau is aiming to expand Canada's trade with the Indo-Pacific region. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum has world leaders meeting in Bangkok to discuss ways of breaking down barriers to trade. Experts say APEC has helped countries sort out red tape, but it has not done much to articulate a strategy for the region. A day after a terse exchange between the PM and the Chinese president at the G20 summit, International Trade Minister Mary Ng says Canada will maintain a respectful dialogue with China. This comes as she warns that Canada's biggest trading partner in Asia has changed. Chinese President Xi Jinping took issue with Mr. Trudeau after the Prime Minister's office provided Canadian media with some basic details about a conversation which Mr. Xi and Mr. Trudeau had on the sidelines of the G20 on Tuesday. The PMO shared that Mr. Trudeau had raised concerns with Mr. Xi about Chinese interference in Canada. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning says Mr. Xi was not criticizing anyone when he approached Mr. Trudeau at the end of the G20 in Indonesia on Wednesday. She said that it was Canada that was being disrespectful and condescending. The Canadian officer commanding a NATO battle group in Latvia has a stark warning for Russian forces. He says they would be routed if they dared to launch an attack against Canadian troops or their allies stationed in the Baltic country. Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Van Eyck is the head of the Enhanced Forward Presence Latvia battle group. He says his troops are better prepared and more experienced than their potential Russian adversaries. The NATO group is composed of just over 1,200 soldiers from 10 countries, including 700 from Canada. Meanwhile, the Polish ambassador to Canada is urging the international community to further support the countries that sit closest to the Russia-Ukraine war. Poland's proximity to the war was sharply illustrated on Tuesday. This was when a missile crossed the western Ukrainian border and killed 2 Polish men in a small village. Officials believe the missile was fired by Ukrainian forces, but Ukraine has rejected the claim and demanded evidence. The Polish ambassador says other countries in the region were not prepared for the situation and are putting themselves at significant risk. In the nation's capital, the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act continued today. A member of the Federal Finance Department says Canada's economy was already facing uncertainty when protests against COVID-19 restrictions blockaded borders and occupied downtown Ottawa. Deputy Minister Michael Sabia took the stand today. He says the demonstrations were hurting not only Canada's economy, but Canada's reputation as a reliable trading partner. He says the Finance Department feared that if the protests went on for too long, there would be lasting economic consequences, this particularly on Canada's automotive industry. A 51-year-old man from Quebec is facing charges of terrorism for allegedly planning a government coup in Haiti. The RCMP alleges that Gerald Nicholas planned an armed revolution against the Haitian government. He went as far as traveling to Haiti to coordinate with individuals who wanted to help overthrow the government. The RCMP says Mr. Nicholas has been charged and he will appear at the Quebec City Courthouse on December 1st. Education workers in Ontario could be striking again as early as next week. Talks between 55,000 education workers and the province have broken down again, and the Canadian Union of Public Employees is a day closer to a strike. CUPE says the two sides recently agreed on a 3.59% wage increase, but the union is still fighting for higher staffing levels in schools. Education Minister Stephen Lecce says the government has put forward multiple improved offers and has not asked for any concessions. Transportation corridors in the north are suffering from climate change, and this is putting the rest of Canada at risk of shortages of vital resources. From ice roads to airports, limited northern transportation infrastructure is facing increasing risks from climate change. Now, this includes permafrost thaw, wildfires, floods, and landslides. A report published by the Canadian Climate Institute in June found that more than half the winter roads in the north could become unstable in the next 30 years if adaptation measures aren't taken. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at stock gifting ahead of the holiday season. We'll speak with Mr. Thomas Caldwell, chair of Caldwell Securities Limited. He will unpack his thoughts on the benefits of gifting stocks. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. With the holidays coming up and Canadians thinking about the gifts to give, one investor says stocks are a great option. Thomas Caldwell says instead of buying someone a gift card, why not purchase a company's stock instead? This comes as investing has gained popularity since the start of the pandemic, with plenty of options to choose from cryptocurrency to meme stocks. Well, joining us now to tell us more about the benefits of gifting stocks is Thomas Caldwell, chair of Caldwell Securities Limited. Mr. Caldwell, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima.
Now, as we mentioned, you believe that instead of buying someone a gift card, it's better to purchase stocks in a company instead. So, can you tell us a little bit more about why this might be a better option?
Well, it really depends on the recipient, doesn't it? I'm at the stage where my children and grandchildren just prefer hard cash. So it really depends on the recipient. Although when my children were younger, I did buy them some shares in companies that they might be interested in, like Disney, for example, or even Canadian Tire, something that they could start to relate to and think in terms of how a business functions. So it's a combination gift educational thing, but clearly it really depends on the age. I mean, if you're giving your 2-year-old a gift of Bank of Montreal, I don't think they'll really appreciate it. But I think it's a good thing to do from both an awareness of how the world works, companies that are out there. You can own a little bit of this company. I think that makes some real sense for people. Or in the case of my children and grandchildren, hard cash is the preference, it seems, these days.
Well, how can Canadians go about gifting stocks? Is it a difficult process?
It's a little bit challenging. Gifting stocks is somewhat different because if you're gifting stocks to anyone, it's considered a deemed disposition. That is, as if you sold it. So you will have either capital gains or capital loss considerations to think of. Also, if you give stock, or that is gifted to a minor, then the dividends from that stock are attributed back to you as your income for a long period of time. I don't know how long until they're over the age of majority. I just don't know. So I think it's very difficult giving stock. I think it's far better to have the cash in the account and buy the stock for them. That's a lot simpler.
Now, another thing to consider, I've heard you speak about gifting stocks to charities. So that's really interesting. How is that done? And is there any benefit or loss to the investor?
There's a tremendous advantage to that. Basically, Don Johnson, I think, got his Order of Canada for really piloting that through the tax department. So if you give marketable securities, that is publicly traded stocks, to a charity, a recognized charity, you get the deduction from that charity as a tax deduction. And also the benefit is you do not get tagged with the capital gains on that. So I mean, let's say just in big numbers, you have $1 million worth of securities, and $900,000 of that is capital gains. It's a company that did extremely well over the years. Well, you get $1 million tax deduction, and you don't get tagged with the capital gain part of it. So it's an immense benefit donating publicly traded shares to a recognized charity. That's a great advantage. It's probably the best way to go about doing it.
Really good advice there, sir. Now, what about tax loss selling? I know a lot of investors might be thinking about that right now. Is this the time to plan your portfolio for the end of the year?
Well, first, let me say, whenever I've done something or not done something for tax purposes, it's always been a mistake. I get frustrated with the stock. Okay, I'm going to sell it and get rid of it and take the loss. I shouldn't be thinking in emotional terms, nor should I be thinking in tax terms. The first thing I should think of is, do I still want to own this company? Does it still have possibilities? If the answer to that investment side of the question is such, no, I think this is over, this company's not going to do well, fine, take the tax loss. Or if you're going to engineer a tax loss, for example, I might have a loss, say, in a bank stock. If you want to take that loss in a bank stock, you might buy another bank stock. I mean, switch from TD to Commerce or something like that. That's a possibility. All I'm suggesting is you take a look at the investment possibilities before you jump to the tax loss. Because if the company's not going to do well, the tax loss is always going to be there. It's not going to go away if the company does not do better. Whether you take it this year or next year, that's a part of financial planning, of course. But don't make the tax loss the sole purpose for doing it, because very often I've sold a stock or haven't sold a stock. I haven't haven't sold it because I'm up so much money and I don't want to pay taxes. And same thing, taxes impacted my investment decision. First thing first is the investment decision.
Always some great advice. Mr. Caldwell, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima. All the best.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with Catherine Murray from The Buck Stops Here. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. It's now time for Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. We are seeing North American equity markets trade lower today, following some recent strength. We are seeing the yields move a little bit higher today. WTI down 2%, following a 1.5% decline yesterday. The key reason for the market pulling back today really has to do with Fed speak, which is a bit on the hawkish side, coming out of St. Louis Fed President Bullard today, reiterating that their primary goal is to fight inflation. Recall one of the key reasons why we've seen such a nice rally in the markets as of late is because we had been getting some lower than expected inflation readings, leading investors to believe that we've seen peak inflation, which investors also believe would cause the U.S. Federal Reserve to pause, maybe stay on hold, maybe do a 50 basis point cut versus 75 basis point. That still might be the case, but we are again hearing from Fed presidents saying we're going to continue to keep fighting inflation. So on the back of that, you are seeing the markets take a bit of a pause here and decline slightly on the day. We're also, of course, watching technicals. Given the rally, perhaps some of these areas of the market have hit up against resistance levels, so technicals also at play here. Also, very importantly, we've seen a number of large cap tech companies announce layoffs this week. That is leading investors to be quite concerned about what they're seeing in terms of their growth prospects. So growth concerns are front and center again. And also some investors now are saying, wait a second, is that rally that we've been seeing as of late, is that just a bear market bounce? So those are all the narratives and the thinking going on in the market today and perhaps this week as well. We did get some economic data out of the United States. Philly Fed did contract more than expected. Housing starts did beat, but are declining versus the September numbers. We're also watching a number of companies, and interesting here, some pretty good results versus expected. NVIDIA, for one, their revenue did come in higher than expected. This is, of course, in the chip sector. And their guidance was better than feared. So that stock is moving higher to the tune of about 2% today, outpacing the broader market. Cisco also came in a little bit better than expected in terms of their recent results announced yesterday after the close. That stock up by about 4%. And we also have Kohl's. They did not provide any fourth quarter guidance, but the street takeaway is on the positive side, helping that stock outperform the broader market today. That, of course, in the retail space. We're also watching Macy's. They had a big beat. That stock's up by 12%. So it's nice when you step back and see that the retail area of the market, the consumer, which accounts for about 70% of the overall U.S. economy, still seems to be showing some strength. That is a positive takeaway. But again, the broader market is pulling back a little bit. As we look at the TSX, it is declining today following a decline yesterday. CPI is very much in focus today, coming in at 6.9% year over year, so steady versus the September time period. Interestingly, though, it did not pop above that 7% rate. That might be viewed as a positive. However, the core component did increase to 5.4%. I just want to point out as well, as it affects so many of us, rent was up by 4.7% year over year. That follows the previous reading of up by 4.2%. So we're continuing to see these inflation pressures on the areas that really affect so many people, housing and food and energy costs. So that is leading many economists on Bay Street to believe that the BOC will not stop in their pursuit to raise rates because they, again, continue to want to combat inflation. We are seeing a bit of a slowdown in certain areas of the market. Housing starts, for one, were down by about 11%. Mortgage costs are the highest we've seen since 1991. And home sales are increasing at a very small pace. Away from that, from a stock perspective, I would just highlight CP to you today. UBS is out with a positive note, reiterating their buy rating and a $117 price target. And lastly, interesting here, we've seen such pressure on the tech stocks and tech sector, but famous investor Kathy Wood of ARK Investments, we've learned, is going to be partnering with BMO, launching a new tech fund. A lot going on in the markets. Again, a bit of a pullback today. We'll see what comes tomorrow and, of course, next week with new data out every day. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern, only on the News Forum Network. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after a commercial break. But when we get back, we're going to be taking a look at today's top news from around the world. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will be back shortly. Russian airstrikes targeted Ukraine's energy facilities again. The strikes came as the first snow of the season fell in Kyiv. This comes as a reminder of the hardships to come in the winter. Air raid sirens have been sounding across Ukraine throughout the week. This is the biggest barrage yet of the nearly 9-month-old invasion against Ukraine's battered power grid. Meanwhile, a Dutch court has convicted 3 men of murder for their role in shooting down a Malaysia Airlines passenger jet with a Russian surface-to-air missile. It killed all 298 people aboard flight MH17 as the aircraft flew over a separatist-controlled region of eastern Ukraine in 2014. The 2 Russians and a pro-Moscow Ukrainian were tried in absentia. The convictions and life sentences were seen as directing the blame for the downing at the Russian government under President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin has always denied any connection, and since the convicted are still at large, it's unlikely they will serve any time. Well, this comes as North Korea continues its missile firings. It launched a short-range ballistic missile that landed in waters between the Korean peninsula and Japan. The launch came hours after North Korea threatened fiercer military responses. Now, this was in response to the U.S. bolstering its security commitment with allies South Korea and Japan. North Korea's foreign minister had warned that a recent U.S.-South Korea-Japan summit accord on the North would leave tensions more unpredictable. Moving to Iran now, where state TV says gunmen opened fire in a bazaar in a southwestern city. It killed 5 people and wounded civilians and security forces. The motive of yesterday's attack in the city of Izeh was not immediately clear. State TV says that groups of several dozens of protesters had gathered in different parts of the city. They were chanting anti-government slogans and hurling rocks at police, who fired tear gas to disperse them. Iran has seen nationwide protests in recent weeks and violent clashes as security forces have cracked down on dissent. Authorities in China are also facing public anger. This comes after a second child's death was blamed on overzealous antivirus enforcement. It's adding to frustration at the measures that are confining millions of people to their homes and sparked fights with healthcare workers. News reports and social media posts say the 4-month-old girl died while in quarantine at a hotel, and emergency services balked at dealing with her family. The ruling Communist Party promised this month that people in quarantine wouldn't be blocked from getting emergency help. Close to 150 countries have now signed up to the Global Methane Pledge. The pledge is an effort to cap the release of the greenhouse gas and is supported by the U.S. and European Union. It was launched at last year's COP26 meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, with about 100 countries signed up. The pledge targets climate-damaging leaks, venting, and flaring from natural gas industries. Well, in a boost for global food security, a wartime agreement between Russia and Ukraine will continue, allowing grain shipments from Ukraine to resume. The United Nations says the deal will be extended by 120 days. The initiative established a safe shipping corridor in the Black Sea. It also includes inspection procedures to address Russian and Ukrainian concerns, which are about cargo vessels traveling off of Ukraine's southern coast, potentially carrying weapons or launching attacks. Myanmar state media says an Australian academic, a Japanese filmmaker, and an ex-British diplomat and an American are among thousands of prisoners being freed. Media say the move by the country's military-controlled government is part of a prisoner amnesty to mark National Victory Day. Close to 5,800 prisoners in total were released, including 11 local Myanmar celebrities. American video game developer Blizzard Entertainment says it will suspend most of its services in mainland China. This will come after its current licensing agreements with the Chinese company end. The announcement has sent shares of that company, NetEase, tumbling. Blizzard partnered with NetEase in 2008 to offer popular games like World of Warcraft, Overwatch, and Diablo in mainland China. It says the two companies did not reach a deal to renew the agreements. The Canadian men's soccer team upset Japan in a game ahead of the World Cup. A penalty kick in extra time that barely crossed the line provided Canada with a 2-1 win against Japan in its FIFA World Cup tune-up on Thursday. The win in Dubai pushed Canada's record to 3-2-3. This since its successful World Cup CONCACAF qualifying run concluded last March. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.